Welcome back in to the B-Sides of Sports. This is our Season 3, Episode 2, and we're going to hit the ground running with Week 2 of the NFL action. We're going to start with the Eagles and the Vikings this week. Obviously, a great matchup here. The Philadelphia Eagles came away with the 34-28 victory. Drake, where do you want to start with this one?
Let's start with the Eagles. Having been to the Super Bowl last year, I think a lot of people had high expectations for them, and despite their 2-0 record, I don't think it's the most impressive 2-0 ever. The Patriots game, after getting up really early, they struggled and almost lost the game in the end. The Patriots had a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. And then same thing with the Vikings, where even though they had constant pressure on Kirk Cousins, they hit him 10 times. He still threw for almost 400 yards and was really torching their secondary, which was one of the strengths of that roster. So I think we're still kind of seeing the Eagles get into form, but I think what we're also seeing is some of those new additions really start to make an impact, and I think supplementing sort of where they're lacking. And again, I think they'll get back to form, but I just think right now you can tell they're still a little in that Super Bowl hangover phase. But obviously DeAndre Swift having 170 last week, he's been one of the players who's really helped them. Zach Cunningham led the team in tackles last week. And then not to mention me and Wilson's pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year, Jalen Carter, has looked phenomenal, especially on the pass rushing side of things. Really just a monster up the middle, and seeing him really just start to hum as kind of, again, just helped, I think, offset because, Jalen Hurts hasn't looked great. The O-line hasn't looked as good as it did year past. Obviously, there was that A.J. Brown fight on the sideline. He was yelling at the coach and Jalen Hurts for his lack of targets. So we've seen tensions be a little high, but they're still 2-0, so I don't think there's tons to worry about on their side. But definitely interesting. I kind of would have expected them, with all that veteran presence on the team, to not struggle as much as they have.
Hard to argue with anything that you're saying there. It's interesting. You hear coaches and players a lot say that it's better to learn from your wins than it is to learn from your losses. And I think that's an anecdote that can kind of go towards the Eagles and how they've started off this season. I think the biggest concern for me on the Eagles side of the ball is just their decision to have Hurts run the ball less. And I really understand it through the lens of not wanting your quarterback to get hit as much, as well as not wanting him to get injured. But I just think it takes away a little bit of that power run dynamic they had last year. That being said, obviously they've gotten a great run game so far this year. Swift looks great in that offense. And again, it's hard to argue with the result if they're able to win with Hurts not having to run the ball that much. There's not a lot of downside to that. You just wonder if they're going to be willing to do that more later on in the season if that's something that is called upon for. I do think the A.J. Brown dynamic is an interesting one to consider. It's, a lot is made about receivers and them being divas and, just the attention they want. Everyone wants to help their team win, and that's a quote that Devontae Smith had on the A.J. Brown situation. I do think it is just an odd timing of your team is winning pretty big at that point. The run game is very strong. There isn't really a need to go towards the deep ball, and I just think it's kind of an interesting conversation to have if, just because the receiver wants their targets, do you want to risk having an unhappy receiver, or do you want to kind of compromise your offense by forcing, throwing the ball a little bit more in that offense? The final thing I kind of had on the Eagles was just that unstoppable 4th and 1 play. I think a lot of controversy came out of it again this past weekend. And personally, I don't think it's necessarily unfair to the game. If it was unfair, I think more teams would do it. I really think it's just a matter of the Eagles personnel. And so that being said, I don't really want to see it banned. I think, if the Eagles can do it well, I agree with the play. So all that to say, again, the Eagles are learning through their wins. It's hard to argue with the result.
Yeah, no, I agree. And same thing with the A.J. Brown circumstance. Just kind of my last thing to really touch on is he still had the second most targets on the team and was complaining. So I think, again, like you said, they didn't really need the deep ball in that game. It wasn't really servicing them. Devonta Smith was really the only one who, he had quite two really pretty long targets. But besides that, it was a lot of intermediate stuff. And again, you won. So I think, again, more than anything is just that diva receiver stereotype, but regardless of that. And then moving over to the Minnesota side of things, I think my biggest takeaway is just the O-line play and the mistakes. They are turning over the ball at a very high rate. Everyone pretty much except the receiving core and Kirk Cousins on this team needs to step up their game tremendously. Alexander Mattison has looked very lackluster. The O-line has looked downright terrible. Kirk has been sacked 4 times through 2 games, but hit 19 times, and that's not even accounting for pressures. And I get that they played 2 good D lines in both Tampa and Eagles. Going from lines with Shaquille Barrett to then having to play, Fletcher Cox and Jalen Carter, and among others, is not necessarily easy, but still, I expect better. And I think a lot is to make of the defense. It used to be one of the best units in the league, very with Pro Bowlers all over the place. Eric Kendricks Hendricks, Anthony Barr, Xavier Rhodes, Harrison Smith, and now a lot of those guys have left and or are aging. So you really can just see that impact as they're trying to find their new identity. Danielle Hunter is pretty much one of the only real consistent pieces. Harrison Smith has really struggled as he's starting to age, and not saying he's a bad player by any stretch, but I just think they need to find their identity because, when Kirk Cousins is throwing for 400 a week and you're losing, you got to figure something out because when you're passing like they are, Kirk Cousins' quarterback rating through 2 weeks right now is 114, 70% completion, 700 yards, 6 touchdowns, only 1 interception, and you're losing games convincingly. I really just think you need to look at pretty much everything else but the quarterback at that point.
Absolutely. Again, it's hard to argue with anything you said there. And in my notes, I basically had everything you just outlined there written out in my notes. Kirk Cousins has been absolutely fantastic. Jefferson in that game against the Eagles, 13 targets, 11 receptions for 159 yards. Just, you can't get much better than that. He looks like the best route runner in the league. And I personally think he's got underrated speed and ability to create separation, which is kind of odd to say, given that he's kind of recognized as the best receiver in the league. A little bit of what I think is happening to the Vikings might be a bit of regression to the mean. You kind of mentioned that defense, and to me, it's a lack of playmaking ability on that defensive side of the ball right now. They just don't have any defenders out there making plays, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the offense to generate points. And 28 isn't bad, but when you give up 34, it's just, it's hard to ask Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson to do more than that. In terms of just these close score games, a lot was made about last year of how the Vikings were 11-0 in those close games, and this year for them to be 0-2, you throw out the term regression to the mean. Obviously, every year is different, every game is different, but to me, that's what it feels like a little bit of. And that being said, the Vikings executed very well down the stretch. I think the Kirk to Jefferson connection got going. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson had a huge role down the stretch. He wasn't targeted for a large part of that second half until really those last 2 drives in the fourth quarter. I just think it was a little, too late for the Vikings, excuse me. And so, yeah, to me, it's just, are other players on that roster going to be able to step up and make plays? Because Kirk and Jefferson aren't going to be able to play at a much higher level than they are right now. And it's making us look good with your dark horse MVP and my offensive player of the year. Yeah. But if they can't turn themselves into W's, I don't think we're going to see much out of the Vikings.
Yeah, that was going to be my last thing, is I was going to joke about that because it really looks like they're going to have to throw for this almost every game if they even want to be competitive. So I think it said Kirk was on pace for over 6,000 yards, 50 touchdowns, and only 9 interceptions on the year. And obviously, that won't happen. Those numbers are very inflated, but regardless, it just shows the absurd wealth of offensive output they've had, yet they can't conjure up wins. It's just pretty ridiculous to me. And then kind of staying in the NFC North, we go to the Bears Buccaneers, where the Bears pretty convincingly beat the Buccaneers pretty convincingly beat the Bears. And Wilson, we'll open this up to you. Obviously, you shared the tweet last week. We both had tweets about the Bears, but you had the one talking about the Baker Mayfield versus Justin Fields comparison. So kind of give me your thoughts on this matchup as well as touch on that if you want to.
Yeah, I think that's a hot take that turned into a real take real quickly, just with one game. It just so happens that this was the matchup we got to see this week. I do think the duality of Mayfield and Fields is a really interesting conversation, in large part because they were both super high picks that had a lot of expectations around them. And going into this year specifically, the expectations were flipped in a way. Fields, a lot of people had as a dark horse MVP candidate, whereas there wasn't much expected out of Mayfield and the Buccaneers. Many people thought Kyle Trask was going to be the starter going into the year. And to me today, outside of those first 2 early deep shots to DJ Moore, Fields looked absolutely horrendous out there playing QB. Obviously at that pick 6 at the end of the game, which is not a pretty play at all, but I think that really summarized how his passing day was going. And to me, again, it's that Ohio State quarterback question of just, are these quarterbacks ready to play at the pro level? I just don't think his ability to read what the defense is giving him is there yet. And it's kind of questionable because everything you hear about him, he's got, he's a high IQ guy. People think he's got a great personality. He works hard, and just his inability to read the defense and kind of create a good chemistry with his receivers is just really concerning to me. He seems to have a lot of concern of throwing into any type of coverage. Again, outside of those first 2 deep shots, he's not throwing anything deep. And those are really just the questions to me surrounding Fields. On the other side of the ball, Baker Mayfield has looked absolutely fantastic. And again, I think when you think about these intangibles, Baker's just the guy that's had to fight for a lot these last couple of years. He had kind of an ugly ending with the Browns, like we mentioned last week. And since then, I think he's tried to make the most of these opportunities. And I'm rooting for him because of that. Obviously, great yardage today, over 300 yards. And again on the complete opposite of Fields, but he's developed a great chemistry with his top receivers and Evans and Godwin. He's just reading what the defense is giving him super well. He's taking the deep shots when he needs to, and again, he just looks super comfortable in that Bucs offense. The Bucs obviously are surprising 2-0 to many people, but it is on the shoulders of Baker to some extent, and I really like that for them and for Baker himself.
Yeah, so to kind of touch on both the quarterbacks, to me, what makes Baker so interesting is he is very limited. He has a massive arm, but he doesn't like to throw to the weak side. It was exploited with the Browns. It's one of the reasons they let him go. But his receivers and him had a very weird falling out that was public, with their dads tweeting about him not getting them the ball well enough, despite him playing through an injury to try to get them in the playoffs. It was a weird situation. But we've seen Baker do a lot of growing up in the NFL and realizing, again, it isn't college. I'm not the best quarterback on the field, and I never will be. That's just the nature of the game. And seeing him mature and become like a real leader of men over these last few years has been very interesting. An amazing rookie year, came in the league and just did a lot of growing up. And I think, again, like you said, we're seeing that with Tampa. He comes in right away. He's only been there for, not even a few months, and he's already solidified himself as one of the leaders, and he's playing amazing at QB. He's really taken all of the steps he needed to on a roster that a lot of people had potentially being the worst team in the league. Here they sit at 2-0. The Bears, on the flip side, at 0-2, have played terribly. And again, a lot of that falls on their quarterback. They got him help at receiver, they got him help at O-line, and he still struggles. And I think it raises the question of Ohio State quarterbacks, but also kind of on him. CJ Stroud is playing for a terrible team. Now, mind you, small sample size, only 2 games. But I would argue that CJ Stroud has looked better through 2 games, throwing for 380 yards today, has looked better through 2 games and in more command of the offense than Justin Field has in his entire tenure with the Bears. And I don't know what it is with Fields, because athletically, he has everything you would ever want. A massive arm. He's played through injuries. He can run faster than almost anyone on the field. Dangerous in open space, has a cannon of an arm, but it just, again, it's like you said, it just doesn't look like the game has come to him yet. The pro game hasn't come to him. While as Baker has really stepped into his own, has accepted what he is, Justin Fields hasn't found what he is yet in the pros, and I think that's why he's really struggling. And again, at this point, it is crazy to say that Baker Mayfield is a better chance at success for an NFL team than Justin Fields, who was once heralded as one of the most underrated quarterback prospects in the last few drafts. But again, I think it speaks to that Ohio State quarterback tree, and if you can ever trust it.
My final take on the quarterback situation here is one that I think you might push back on a little bit, but I think the organizational structure around these quarterbacks has something to do with their performance. And to me, looking at the Bears and what they've tried to do over the last couple of years, obviously there was no kind of remnant of a winning culture Fields' first couple of years in the league. The Bears were horrible, they knew it, and it was really just tanking for the lottery. Whereas this year, I think in this offseason, they tried to bring in a lot of veterans to surround Fields with more talent. Like you mentioned, they got him some threats at receiver. They made the O-line better. They even brought in a lot of players on the defensive side of the ball. But to me, what I think the Bears lack is any type of identity of the type of team they want to be and the ways in which they want to win. Fields is a running quarterback, hardly ran the ball today. And again, I just think it speaks to a little bit of a lack of identity. Whereas if we look at Baker and the Bucs situation right now, I think the Bucs learned to win from Brady. And, you can give and take on how much that remains after Brady's outside of that locker room. But I think Baker was able to go into a locker room where guys knew how to be a professional and how to have the right outlook going into the season, taking the season week by week. And I think it's something that Baker himself, as he's had to grow in this NFL, it really benefited him from a mentality standpoint. And so I just kind of look at it as like Baker's a quarterback that's now finds the right culture for him. And again, credit to himself. He did well with the Rams opportunity last year. But I just think sometimes it's being in, the right player in the right locker room. And to me, Baker's in the right spot and Fields might not be.
No, I think, again, my last kind of thing on that is I think that's completely fair. Again, I think infrastructure is very important to a player, right? It's one of the reasons I think Patrick Mahomes was so well set up for success, and one of the reasons I'm not as high on him as a lot of people. I think he kind of just fell into the perfect situation for him. Similarly, Justin Fields fell into one of the hardest situations, and he came from a notoriously bad pro outlook situation at Ohio State. So I think it's just kind of a perfect mix. I think if he goes to a team like the Chiefs, again, give him a guy like Andy Reid, I think he's a lot better, but I still just think there are a lot of problems with his game that need to be ironed out.
Absolutely. So finally, then we'll turn over to our third matchup of this A block, that being the 49ers and the Rams. Super fun matchup here. The Niners took that game away 30-23. Drake, major takeaways from this one?
I think my biggest takeaway was, again, just Christian McCaffrey and his he really is, I think, one of the most unique talents we've ever had in the modern day NFL. Not only because he's a white running back, but because he's like, I was talking to my dad about this today. I was like, in our generation of football, 2000 and on, there's been a sort of almost a, especially 2010s on in my era when I've been watching, there never really was that guy at running back where he just was truly dominant. Every play felt like he could get a touchdown. There were guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, Barry Sanders, Adrian Peterson. And again, they played when I was real young, but not when I was watching football and digesting it as a whole. But I really feel like our generation's one of those guys is Christian McCaffrey. It just feels like every touch he truly has a chance to get a touchdown. His long today was 51. Last week he had a 65-yard touchdown. He added 20 yards on the ground, ended with 140 from scrimmage on only 24 touches. It wasn't even like he got a Derrick Henry workload from years past. It just is truly remarkable how I think he's one of the most talented runners in the league, and he's put with maybe the best offensive system in the league in Shanahan. It's so fun to watch. I'm so glad that Christian McCaffrey went there because I don't even like San Fran. They've won a bunch of Super Bowls. They don't need any more. They've won enough, but it's hard not to root for them with Mr. Irrelevant at QB. And like I said, just the most fun running game to watch in all of football.
Yeah, I really like that you just started off highlighting the impact that C-Mac has had on that offense. Since he's been there as a starter, they're virtually unbeatable. And while I do think the Niners are top heavy at times, I think the primary concern for me is their reliance on their top players. Purdy today really only threw the ball to 5 players: Kittle, Ayuk, Samuel, C-Mac, and Juwan Jennings. And to me, especially when the games start to get out of hand at the end of these games, I really question why Shanahan isn't really willing to put in second string players. Elijah Mitchell had 0 snaps at running back today, and that to me is just a little concerning given that, C-Mac obviously held up very well so far, and they were able to limit the snaps, and partially because the game was out of reach for a good part of the game. And I just think it's a little concerning that they're not really willing to go to that second string running back. If you look at, the season long outlook, C-Mac's obviously a guy that's been injured in the past. And I just don't necessarily know if they want to ride that super high usage rate throughout the year, even though it is going to be a winning recipe for them. Again, with Purdy at quarterback, he is decently limited, but I think with those playmakers, you don't have to ask him to do a lot. And again, on the flip side here, I think Stafford, what we saw at the end of that game is he was trying to do too much. Obviously, he threw those picks, not great. And, historically, Stafford is known as a mistake-prone quarterback. He's chasing the big play, but with the big play, there's also going to be a lot of big mistakes, and I think that's why they're ultimately unable to fully get back in the game. A super fun matchup overall. I think the Rams are a lot better, like we talked about last week, than people expected going into the season. And, a shout-out to the receivers. Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell played very well. Nacua, I think, has the record for the most receptions through the first 2 games.
Yeah.
For starting receivers. So super cool to see that on the Rams side of the ball, but I just think the workload they're putting on Stafford right now is too much. Throwing the ball 55 times at that age with that injury history, I just don't think it's going to be sustainable. And yeah, for the Niners, it's really just a matter of trying to stay healthy and peaking at the right time.
Yeah, I think the Rams thing is interesting because I agree. I think with that arm injury especially, there's some age for concern. So the decision also to make Cam Akers a healthy scratch. And don't get me wrong, I really like Kyron Williams, but it's just confusing when you are putting your quarterback into a situation where he has to throw 55 times against one of the best defenses in the league where he's going to take some hits and, your receivers are going to have a hard day at the office. And he's looked sharp. It really doesn't look like anything. He does not look like he's aging at all. He still has a cannon of an arm. He just fits some balls in really tight spaces. But I do agree with that where they got to figure something out to where he doesn't have to throw so many times. In years past, they've kind of had gadget guys, right, like Odell's and stuff who'd get a lot of carries or even throws. But I feel like when Cooper Kupp's not in there, they don't have that. And I think that's really what they're missing. When Cooper Kupp comes back, I think it'll help a lot of things because instead of having to throw to Puka Nacua, no knock to him. I think he's a fantastic player who's really taken advantage of Cooper Kupp being out. But I think when Cooper Kupp comes back, it just makes everything in the offense work better. One of the best run blocking wide receivers in the game, one of the best slot receivers in the game, one of the best just overall receivers in the game added to your team. It helps everything. So I think, again, it isn't sustainable, but hopefully when Cooper Kupp comes back, it won't be needed as much.
I have a fun Rams take for you that I'll save for our C block, but to end off here, I did want to ask you the question. A lot's made about this head coaching matchup. Obviously, Shanahan has really owned the regular season matchup. That being said, McVay and the Rams obviously had that one in the playoffs. Do you think there's an edge here that just, it gives Kyle like the edge over Sean every single time they play? Or do you think there's just something like logistically on the field that happens every time?
Shanahan just outcoaches himself while McVay always does what he does. In that Rams Super Bowl, you saw it. The Patriots were countering their zone running so much, and that was when they had Todd Gurley and Jared Goff still. But they stuck to it because they're like, look, this is what we do. We're going to stick to it. Kyle Shanahan sometimes outcoaches himself. Again, I always think of that deep throw that Jimmy Garoppolo misses in the playoffs. Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't make that throw in the regular season, and people are so mad at him for missing it. Don't get me wrong. I get that he's open, but expecting him to do something that he doesn't do all year in the biggest game of the year is just confusing to me. I think it's more of a case of in the postseason, Shanahan outcoaches himself. The 28-3 Falcons game, he was the offensive coordinator. He was calling the plays. And then obviously that Chiefs game, again, another blown lead. I think Shanahan's issue isn't who he's playing, it's himself. While McVay's issue is if a team has a good game plan for him, he's going to struggle to go off of it because McVay does his brand of ball really well, while Shanahan outcoaches himself more often than anyone else in big games.
Strong take. I think that's a good way to end off our A block. So we'll take a quick break and we'll come back in for our B block.
Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports, and this week we are highlighting AFC teams, and particularly the fringe playoff teams, the one we think have a potential high upside, but there are still some things they need to work out. So in this segment, we're just going to kind of talk about what we think their X factors are or coaching strategy, things that they need to just improve on as a whole, or really take a look at, put it under the microscope if they want to be competitive come January and February. So Wilson, opening up, we're starting with one of your favorite teams, the Chargers. What do you think they really need to look at going forward to try to escape this 0-2 start?
Absolutely. And, that 0-2 start, like you alluded to, is super tough to come back from. I think over the last 5 years, the only team to start 0-2 and make it into the playoffs is those 2022 Bengals. And I don't think these Chargers are those Bengals. That being said, I do think they still have an outside shot to get in. I think when we think about X factors with this team, it all starts with the head coach and Brandon Staley. And again, I really just want to hone in on that defense. You and I talked at length last week about how disappointing that defense looked with all those stars they have on that side of the ball. And this week, I think they performed a lot better. Obviously, they're able to generate 5 sacks. They were just pressuring Tannehill all night and just able to make better plays than they were last week. That being said, the team obviously still lost in overtime. And while I don't really want to question the offense, it is concerning that Eckler wasn't able to play there today. Obviously, they didn't get nearly as much run production as they did last week. But I just think Staley's inability to have the defense perform at key moments in the game is a concern to me. When you look at a defensive-minded head coach, a lot is made about they don't have that same dynamic with the quarterback. And so, the quarterback is obviously going to lean in a lot more to the OC. And I really like the Kellen Moore, Justin Herbert combination. Obviously, they didn't execute today. But again, I just go back to, I don't know if the team has their identity with a defensive-minded coach at the helm. Maybe to me, that's a larger question of can defensive-minded head coaches win in the modern NFL? Obviously, a lot of people would push back. You just look at guys like Belichick, and it's an easy way to say yes. But I think to me, that's one of the largest concerns. And again, the defense, although it made plays today, just still doesn't feel connected. And I think that speaks overall to the Chargers roster as a whole. It doesn't feel like a connected roster to me, hence why we get that phrase, the Chargers are going to charger.
Yeah, well, and again, my X factor for them is just to fire Staley. I put it a lot more cut and dry than you do because I really think anyone could succeed with that offense. And who wouldn't score with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, and the newly added Quentin Johnston? Anyone could. So I don't think he deserves any credit for the offensive output because, like you said, he's a defensive coach. So if that's what they're going to claim him for, the defense should be good. Khalil Mack was guarding Tyreek Hill week 1 for a play. He had Tyreek, and again, they play a 3-4, so Khalil Mack is in theory stand-up linebacker. But come on, you know what Khalil Mack is. You're a defensive guy. That's inexcusable. It is absurd to me that Ryan Tannehill, who looked like an absolute preschooler last week, passing, just horrendous, 0 for 3 for interceptions. And again, he was under 50% completion, held under 200 yards, 3 interceptions last week. And this week he had an 123 quarterback rating, and you're a defensive head coach. I just think there is no more excuses to give him anymore. I think Nathaniel Hackett had more of an argument at this point than Brandon Staley does for this Charger team, because it's just a waste of talent at this point, and it really is. It is. Chargers are the Chargers through and through. They have a terrible owner, they have terrible management, and it's showing once again, as they're going to waste another Hall of Fame quarterback and Hall of Fame talent weapons. It's just what they do.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate on that note to move over to the Bills, because to me, the next stat that I wanted to point out is a lot is made about a young quarterback and their head coach. The combination, if it doesn't win a Super Bowl in 5 years, they historically never go on to ever win a Super Bowl. And, Herbert and Staley are obviously a little younger in that relationship, but it doesn't look good. And if we talk about the Bills, obviously Allen and McDermott are now outside of that 5-year window. And again, I just raised the question of, can a defensive-minded head coach win with a offense that is heavily reliant on its quarterback and the quarterback's ability to run that offense? Well, the Bills obviously look great today. I think the Bills always look good in these chicken soup type of games where they're able to get out big early on in the game and they just run away with it. To me, the questions around the Bills really surround their ability to fight through adversity. And when we look at historically the Bills and how far they've gotten into the postseason, they've been on a downhill decline ever since they made that AFC title game. And you can make a lot about the matchups. Obviously, every year's different matchups, but I just don't think the Bills have the right kind of group of players on the field out there to just put together what it takes to fight through that adversity. Allen himself is just prone to making huge mistakes down the stretch. Him in the red zone has been a huge, error-ridden the play down there. And then if you look at the rest of the roster, obviously Diggs and Allen have had a relationship that's been rocky at times. The defense doesn't seem to be able to make any stops when it comes, down the stretch in the postseason. And so again, with the Bills, it's really just a question of, I don't think the head coach is right. I think you've got to make a change at the helm because the roster, again, doesn't feel connected to me.
No, I think that's an interesting take because I don't necessarily think that's what they need. But I do understand where you're coming from. Especially with his decision-making in terms of, the offensive output. They have a very heavy reliance on Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen making plays versus sustained drives and, really just beating a team down, with the run game. They almost never do that. This was a rare week where they did, and I think a lot of that is, again, they got James Cook, who's really coming into his own in his second year. They got Damian Harris, a great Alabama back, played for the Patriots most recently, and Latavius Murray, who's been a solid number one on his own. So it's just very interesting for me, their lack of running the ball. So I think I think that's why they blow teams out so well. It's like you said, they're really great in those games where they get up by 30. No one in the NFL wins a game better than the Bills do when they win, because when it rains, it pours with the Bills. But those close games are where they've struggled, and I think a lot of that is on Allen and his mistakes. And I don't necessarily think that's McDermott's fault as much as Allen. Again, that maturity I was talking about Baker Mayfield, I really need to see that out of Josh Allen, because I feel like so often he just thinks his athleticism really can help him make any play. And at some point you have to understand, look, even the best quarterbacks in the league, they need good weapons and a good coach and a good O-line and a good run game to win. No one wins on their own. No one. No one in the NFL history has ever won on their own. That's just fact. Tom Brady only had a bottom 10 defense 6 times in his career. Peyton Manning and Drew Brees had a combined 17. And look who's the best of all of them. It doesn't really come down to you as an individual as much as it is you just helping your team. And sometimes I think Josh Allen thinks he is the team a little too much because of how they put the standard up to him. They really do expect him to play hero ball so often. He plays hero ball in games that he shouldn't, and they lose them. That Jets game, a perfect example. 3 interceptions, terrible interceptions. All of those were just terrible on him. And I think, to me, their X factor is Josh Allen's decision-making and just, again, growing up and being like, look, I understand that I'm a very important part of this team, but at the end of the day, I also need to trust my guys sometimes to just do the right thing and to not have to make them try so much harder for every play.
And I think that's why I would take it back to the coach. And I think that lack of development that we've seen out of Allen in part has to ride some on the shoulders of Ken Dorsey and Sean McDermott. When I think about Allen and some of the plays he was making last week against the Jets, he was running 8 yards away from the marker, trying to hurdle a defender for the first down. And you just watch a play like that and you're like, why is a guy that many consider to be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL make that play at that moment in the game? It's just concerning to me. And I think the lack of development that area has to fall on the coaching.
Yeah. Well, and I always wished Bruce Arians would have gotten a hold of him, because what he did with Jameis Winston, I mean, that offense, he wants to throw the ball deep, Bruce Arians, every play, and so does Josh Allen. I think it would have been so fun, and I think it's a shame that he retired because I think if they get rid of McDermott, I think they should do everything in their power to try to pull him out of retirement for a year because I think that could be what it takes because Bruce Arians will live with turnovers. They were a playoff team when Jameis threw 30 interceptions. Yeah. No one wins better than Bruce Arians with a quarterback like that, and God, it would be so interesting, and it's a shame that we never got that.
Absolutely. I think, that would explode in one of two ways, either in the best way possible or absolutely really to the bottom. I think with that, then it's appropriate to switch over to the last two teams that we wanted to highlight here, the Cincinnati Bengals as well as the Baltimore Ravens. And here, to me, these are two teams that really do two completely opposite things. And again, in the question of, is this a coaching concern? What are the X factors here? I think these are two really good teams to kind of have a dual conversation about. For the Bengals, they always seem to get off to a slow start, but they always manage to peak at the right time. Is that a Burrow thing? Is that a coaching thing? And then if we look at the Ravens have great starts to all of these seasons, but at the end of the seasons, they're never able to peak at the right time. Whether that's a question of health, coaching, or even a Lamar question, I think is interesting to consider.
No, for the Bengals, I honestly don't really even have much more to say than what is with the slow starts. This is your second season now. You're starting 0-2. You made history when you made the playoffs at it and had a decent run. I'm so frustrated with Zach Taylor because as a fan, of football, it's like it's same thing with Brandon Staley and the Chargers. I hate to see a waste of talent, and that Bengals offense is so fun to watch when it's humming. So why is it so slow to start every single year? And same thing for the Ravens. To me, I think it's more of, again, now trying to protect Lamar, and I think their new OC really is going to do that. They brought in Todd Monken, who was Georgia's OC for the last 3 years, and he's really trying to get Lamar to throw more and not run as much, which, again, kind of that same thing with Jalen Hurts. It's a double-edged sword. But I also think Lamar is one of the most insane arms in football, despite having, again, maybe just the best athlete in football is Lamar Jackson. But I think they really kind of have let it show these last 2 weeks. They aren't running him as much, which is good. They're 2-0. But also, I think as Lamar starts to figure out this offense, I think they can finally be dangerous late. They're always good early, like you said. So I think the Ravens really are primed for maybe their first truly 13-3 type year, because I think as Lamar starts to get cooking in this offense, if they can stay healthy and with his less runs, he's not getting hit as much. He wasn't even sacked today. And I think I'm not like a hater on the Cincinnati Bengals front seven. I think it's a solid group. So to keep him clean, I think was really impressive, as well as, again, he didn't touch the ball more than 15 times, which he had historically done in a lot of their wins, especially their divisional wins. So for the Ravens, I think it's just get Lamar comfortable, really get him in that OC clicking, and for the Bengals, stop starting out so slow. I mean, it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, I'm with you with everything you said there. And again, I hate to put it all on the quarterbacks, but to me, both of these teams are going to go as far as their quarterbacks. I don't think Zach Taylor's doing the Bengals any favors with his strategy or his game management, but we know that Burrow is arguably the second best quarterback in the league. And, if Burrow is going to be clicking at the right time, the Bengals are going to be in it every single year. And then with the Ravens, like you said, I love the addition of the new OC. I think the offense is looking a lot different than it has in the past. I think Lamar is able to get out, pass the ball in a way that he hasn't been able to in the past. And although I was sad to see Odell Beckham go down with the injury today, I do think the receiving core is starting to click with Lamar a lot better. And again, if Lamar can stay healthy and if the offense can just get better game by game, just get Lamar more comfortable in this new passing offense, I think the Ravens could be real dangerous in the AFC.
No, I agree. And with that, we will close this segment and go to our next one, a new segment called Drake Decide. We will be right back.
Welcome back into the C block of the B-Sides of Sports. Again, this is our Season 3, Episode 2, talking all things NFL Week 2. And to end our show today, I thought of a new segment that we could run with called Drake Decides. And Drake is going to be new to this. I'm explaining it to him as I'm explaining it to the audience. But the idea here, Drake, is that I want to pitch you some hot takes. They might be mine. They might just be something I read off the web as a way to kind of hedge against a take I might have. And Drake, you're going to decide if these are valid or invalid and why. So with that, I think we'll start with the first one I have for you here. And that is Daniel Jones is a bottom half tier quarterback in the NFL.
I disagree, but I only agree on the pretense that I think he is a top 16 quarterback. That is like the type of caliber he is. I think he is like one of the bottom caliber of what you can win with. Is this a little biased because I like the Giants? Maybe, but it's also, again, just look at the game today. As soon as the O-line was able to start keeping him clean, he wheeled and dealed and led a 20-point comeback, and would have had 2 rushing touchdowns if one did get taken back by a off the play holding. So I disagree, but barely. If I was rating this in terms of severity, I would say I disagree on the pretense again that he's top 16, not bottom 16.
Yeah, watching the first quarter or so of that game, I was about to write Daniel Jones as a bottom 5 quarterback in the NFL, but he did have a super strong closeout to that game. Obviously, he is a dual threat quarterback, so I do want to give him credit. The second one I have for you here is with Zach Wilson at QB, the Jets will finish last in the AFC East, even with that vaunted defense.
I think it's possible, especially after watching the game today, because I know that the Cowboys are a really loaded team, but Zach Wilson, again, you have Garrett Wilson and you only target him a few times. It'll never not be confusing to me why they don't have a better connection, especially having now worked together for a few years. So I'm going to say that that's valid. I don't like Zach Wilson as a prospect. I think he plays way too loose with the football. And again, same thing. Selah being a defensive coach, it really does not help him out a ton. And we've also seen Zach Wilson's attitude be an issue, which you don't want that at quarterback. So I agree. I do think they have a potential to come in last.
And I'll claim my stake for that take. I'm selling all of my Zach Wilson stock. He's like absolutely horrendous the last 2 games.
Yes.
All right, the third one I have for you here. Even after starting 2-0, the Bengals will remain the top threat in the AFC to dethroning the Chiefs in this proverbial Chiefs versus the field argument, which I know that you don't necessarily view the AFC as that, but
I'm gonna say agree just because, again, I think the talent they have is similar to that of a team like the Bills, where even if you kind of suck, your talent can carry you so far in this league, and I think that's where we see it. I mean, that receiver core is still just absolutely loaded. Joe Burrow is one of my favorite quarterbacks in football. The defense is a really solid unit, and they did lose he went to the Falcons. Jesse Bates. They did lose Jesse Bates, the free safety, obviously the stud free safety, but I still think they have enough talent to carry them. So again, this is a very light agree. I very lightly think this is valid. Not really strong. I still think the Ravens could potentially dethrone them in that division, but I'm going to say agree.
Very nice. All right, I've got 3 more for you here. So number 4, CJ Stroud has the highest floor of the 2023 rookie quarterback class.
No, I absolutely agree with this one, just from a standpoint of he has all the tools, the physical tools, the biggest arm, probably not besides Anthony Richardson. He had a lot of good reps at Ohio State, even though they don't historically support QB. And again, he's got a young head coach who really wants to help him win. So I think that also supports and helps really bring out his floor. So I agree with that.
Yeah, the passing yards have been off the charts, but again, the context of what they're asking him to do, still don't want to take away any credit. He's looked great.
Yep.
All right, number 5. The Rams believe they are a Super Bowl contender and should be considered a top 4 team in the NFC. And top 4, I would hedge there with the Cowboys, Eagles, and Niners as the only teams ahead of them.
I mean, from their perspective, I agree. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think they look at themselves like that. Again, I don't think they're really in a tank mode anymore. Stafford's back. And he's throwing the ball 55 times a game. I mean, I think they think they are back. And again, the decision to sit Cam Akers, you obviously trust Kyron Williams. They think the running game doesn't miss a step. So again, for them, I think they do think that. I don't, but I 100% don't doubt they do, especially after this impressive showing against the Niners. I do think there's an argument for it now, but I don't agree. But yeah. I think they probably do think they are top 4.
Absolutely. And I still like the Seahawks there. If I'm just thinking about, top teams in the NFC, I probably like the Seahawks a little bit more than the Rams, but obviously the Rams won that game. So, again, the Rams should feel the way they feel. Finally, the Falcons and their run game will be enough to win the NFC South, even though Ritter might be the 4th best starting quarterback in that division.
Oh, Ritter's absolutely terrible, but you're right. That run game is amazing. And they just have such a bevy of weapons, too, from Kyle Pitts to Drake London. I mean, the talent out there on offense is insane. So the fact that Desmond Ridder still looks bad is remarkable almost. It's almost impressive how mediocre he looks with that team. But Bijan Robinson has been nothing short of spectacular. I really just cannot believe I even drafted him number 1 in one of my fantasy leagues, and even I didn't think he would be this good to start. I wasn't huge on him in college, but everyone was so high on him in terms of his character and his athletic profile that I was, so I think that's valid. The NFC South is a particularly weak division outside of maybe the Saints, but again, Tampa is surging right now. But I will say valid just from a standpoint of that run game is absolutely absurd. Tyler Algier's at a 1,000-yard rusher. Cordell Patterson's an 1,000-yard rusher. And Bijan Robinson is well on his way to being a 1,000-yard rusher. It's just such a unique three-headed monster they have.
Absolutely. The run game is just incredible. Obviously, Patterson was out today with the injury still, but just incredible performances from the Falcons. That was funny. They were really just kicking field goals down the stretch to kind of overtake the lead. But that's all they have to do, right? Just run the ball down, the opponent's throat and just see where that lands them. So thanks for that, Drake. I think there was a lot of great takes there.
Yeah. No, I try it. This was most of the stuff we do is pretty scripted, so it was kind of fun to do something that I had no clue going into this, so I think it was fun. And so then, as one of our last thing carrying over, as we said last pod, we are doing picks now. Once we have more of a body of work, obviously it's only been 2 weeks, and this week isn't even finished. We're recording during the Dolphins-Patriots game as a little behind the scenes, so our picks are very limited. So as it goes on, we'll make this more and more of a thing. But just to kind of close, we're going to go over how we've been doing. So Wilson struggled week 1 with a 7-9 record. I did a little better with an 11-5 record. And then this week so far, I'm 10-3. Wilson's 9-4. So Wilson's righted the ship. Overall, I'm 21-8. Wilson is 16-13. But after that abysmal week 1, Wilson's had a great week 2 to bounce back. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think, we're kind of starting to get trends. Obviously, we both improved drastically from week 1. And I think that's just, again, to show once you kind of get a feel for things, it's a little easier. And I even thought this week was harder to guess a lot of these games, which is interesting to see us do better despite me thinking it'd be harder. And again, I think that's just now that we've seen those week 1 games, we have a little bit of an idea of what we're working with a little more.
Drake calls it guessing the games. I really call it projecting the games, and the 13 that I missed over the last 2 weeks just didn't go according to the script.
Yeah, no, these survivor pools, there's a whole fantasy league, trying to pick winners, because it really is just so interesting. The NFL is the most competitive of the major sports leagues, I have always said, besides maybe baseball. And even then, it's 8 teams are competitive in baseball. In the NFL, it really is like 15 teams. And so that's one of the things I love about it. But, man, it makes picking them hard. And having now picking the whole year, and we're really going to get to see all of our picks, it's going to be enlightening. It'll really show us how well we actually think, how well we think we know the NFL versus how well we actually know it.
Absolutely.
And with that, with this week, we are going to go to a close. We hope you enjoyed. Sorry about the last week's pod being a little late. We had quite a few technical difficulties. YouTube has just been absolutely a pain to deal with these last few weeks. So this week we are going to be better. This pod will be up a lot earlier. And so, yeah, we hope you enjoy, and we will see you guys next week.